remember that I think it was Claire Dillon who mentioned similar challenges at places where she worked or she was involved, and she's also with InnerSource. She was with InnerSource Commons, so she also learned similar stories. This sounds like that this is not very specific to Mercedes, but other companies are fighting the same challenge of the internal structure, and as you say, though, how those contracts were structured at the time, they were sort of actively blocking teams from being able to work together and share code and knowledge and experience as well, I assume. So when you started to advocate for inner source methods, the fact that a term and concept of inner source existed was helpful to advocate for more collaboration within the company, was enough to get started when you were starting to talk to people and advocate for the idea?
The term itself came up a few years before, right? But at that time, it was really most people knew open source, but inner source wasn't a thing yet, right?
Right.
So I mean, a lot of times you're like, what is inner source? Oh, it's like open source, except it stays within the company, and then people understand, right?
And when you were advocating, were you pointing out challenges, or were you more pointing out the advantages of collaborating inside the company? What was your strategy to get from the idea to execution and get the buy-in from people?
So, good question. So I mean, of course, I went from the meetup to another department meetup and told the story, basically the story that I just told you, and to get everybody to understand the problem and to see there's something we need to do. And then, in the big corporation Mercedes-Benz, it was taken into the IT strategy so that it had the four parts. It had open source usage, open source collaboration, with like contributions, open source publications of your own, and inner source. So inner source was one of the four pillars in that strategy. And then of course we had to talk about the challenges. So how can we fix the contracts, or how can we fix that we have so many different technological platforms and so forth? Then that helped that we could work on these things.
As you were diving into this advocacy work, do you remember what was the most challenging? Like things that people didn't understand, or they had a misconception about, or they were just not open to change, like a process or way of working just because it's been in place for so long, or maybe something else.
A few things come to mind. I mean, in IT, with the IT folks, it was an easier thing because I guess, as IT, you're used to constant change anyway, to new technologies anyway, all the time. You were already familiar with open source. You were just not using it at work and things like that. But now you have to convince other parts of the company as well. For example, the legal department, right? And so when we first got together with the legal department and told them what we wanted to do, they came to the table and they said, so we understand that you guys want to give away software that we wrote with company money for free. Um, we're sure this is a misunderstanding, but what is it that you want? Said, and we said, well, actually, that's exactly what we want. you know, and then he's like, well, but why does that make any sense? And then we explained it to them why it makes, and then they started understanding. And obviously at the same time, we had no idea of what the legal challenges were because, we didn't speak their language either. And so they told us, but this poses certain problems or certain challenges, and then we have to talk about these. So it was a lot of um, trying to understand what the other side, I mean, other side in quotes, because we're the same company. So Um, but like, why is this a legal requirement? And then, they told us, and then they said, why do you even want to do this? This is dangerous. And we're like, no, wait, it's not dangerous because. And so it was really interesting. And but I mean, the main point is you have to get together and listen to each other, right?
Did you end up with an advocate in the legal department? Somebody who was like, "What is this open source thing anyway? How does this work? What are these licenses? Who are these other people who are the other legal people in this ecosystem that I can talk to?" Did you find anybody that was like that? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't.
No, absolutely, yes. So we really found open ears, in the legal department, and I mean to this day we have our regular meetings, and there are people from the legal department, and some understand open source from the core, some are learning or have learned, but we have people from the legal team and governance team, and they're very close connected, and they have an open source mindset now as well for the most part, I mean, sometimes they're, of course, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just it, right? I mean, they're a legal person's viewpoint on any given situation, they're always going to look at it differently than the developers or those that are trying, or the technical folk that are trying to get something technical done, right? But that's exactly why you bring them together, because it's a
Exactly.
different viewpoint.
I mean, it's their job to prevent risk from the company and endangering the company. And then it's the job of the engineers and tech people to advance technologically and get innovation on the road. And that sometimes is contradictory. Sometimes engineers would do many things that might not be so good for the company from a risk and legal point of view. So it's very important that you talk to each other. But so as I said, our legal people there have a great mindset and are really helpful. Trying to let's make this happen and not let's prevent it, right? That of course is a change, and over time, but all in all, it's working really well.